You're watching the most brilliant tag team takedown of Senator, now Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. And I don't even know if Senator Tammy Duckworth and Senator Cory Booker were aware that they were going to be setting this up so brilliantly. If it was a coincidence or they planned it, I don't know. But what you're going to see here, I'm playing it here, is Tammy Duckworth get Marco Rubio to admit that when Donald Trump evoked the Alien Enemies Act, when he did an executive order calling for the removal of Venezuelan young men that he says are part of Tren La Huelga, that the law requires you to be at war, and Donald Trump said, well, we are at war with them. Marco Rubio admitted that it was nothing but a ruse, that it was just a tool, that it had no teeth whatsoever. What they said and what they did and what they meant were three different things. And he admitted that. Thank you, Senator Tammy Duckworth. And you're going to watch here, it's really heated. Like it's a heated thing. But the setup is that up until this point, just let you know, he had been saying that we're not at war for terms of telling the other senators that's why he didn't need to get permission from Congress, because we're not at war. So Senator Tammy Duckworth said, oh, we're not at war, huh? Eh? Watch this. And right after that, I'm going to play Cory Booker. And Cory Booker closes it out because Cory Booker gets Marco Rubio to admit that revoking the temporary protective status of Venezuelans is not a good idea, especially after he got Marco Rubio to admit that Venezuela is a hot mess right now. So you're saying it's a hot mess. You're in this hearing saying it's a hot mess, but your Secretary of Homeland Security has just tried to revoke the TPS status of Venezuelans. Gotcha. Good stuff, man. Watch this, and we'll discuss on the other end. And if you're watching this on a short platform, meet me. We're on YouTube, where I'm going to play the full 2 clips and give my thoughts on the other end.
With Congress for...
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, last March, the president invoked the Alien Enemies Act, a notorious wartime law last used for Japanese internment. He said that he was responding to the Maduro regime's supposed invasion or other acts of war against the United States. But in recent weeks, you, the Department of Justice, and our friends across the aisle have repeatedly said that we are not at war with Venezuela. Secretary Rubio, if that is true and we are not at war with Venezuela, will you advise the president to rescind his invocation of the Wartime Alien Enemies Act?
Well, that was a mechanism to remove people from our country that prevent grave danger. So, for example, we know for a fact that Tren de Agua is a very dangerous gang. In fact, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I may have been the first member of Congress.
This is a wartime act, Mr. Secretary.
Well,
are we currently at war with Venezuela?
No, we're not in a state of war in Venezuela.
Okay, the Supreme Court has described the Alien Enemies Act as a wartime power, our Supreme Court. And before now, the Alien Enemies Act was only invoked during the War of 1812, World War I, World War II, when it was used to intern thousands of innocent civilians. Are you really arguing that the president should be able to wield an internment law?
No, but we're talking about 2 separate things here. So you're talking about the state of Venezuela, or are describing the regime.
And
we're talking about, but what the president designated.
Invoked the Alien Enemies Act.
I know, Senator, but let me be clear with you. No, but what the president was talking about are these gangs that have, and these narco trafficking groups that are waging war on the United States. There's no doubt. These groups have waged war on the United States. They have waged, for example, Tren de Agua is not just a criminal gang presence in our street. It is a criminal gang directly responsible for narco trafficking.
The Trump administration has acknowledged that the vast majority of the men it rounded up and deported to torture under this law had no criminal records whatsoever.
We didn't torture anybody.
Over 75%.
Who did we torture? We haven't tortured anybody. We've arrested people that are members of gangs, and we've deported them. We don't want gang members in our country.
Investigations have found that many of the men were here legally. If the administration is willing to lie about who it's targeting under this law, what protections do totally innocent people have against abuse? Again, I want to ask you, will you advise the president to rescind his invocation of the Wartime Alien Enemies Act?
No, of course not. I mean, these are people that are threats to the national security of the United States. But I've described this in hearings in the past, including before you guys.
So you're saying that we're at war?
We are absolutely. When it comes to narco trafficking groups and criminal gangs that are targeting the United States for criminal activity.
We're in a state of war.
There's no doubt about the fact that we're
So then,
confronting them in a
do the
warlike setting
international
because they're
laws of
waging
war
war on
apply,
us.
and do the Geneva Convention
They're waging
apply?
war against us, and they're enemy combatants as a
The second thing really quick is that when Tammy Duckworth mentions the fact that none of these men have legal the criminal, he doesn't address the fact that a majority of them didn't have criminal backgrounds. He can't. So instead he pivots and said we didn't torture them, but contraire, if you do take the steps to send someone to a prison, and he had to know those prisons because Marco Rubio negotiated that contract, and also Christy Nome toured it, and also you should know as the Secretary of State, if you do research before you send someone, that it's known for human rights violation, it's known for being a torture camp. You knew that. So if you send someone to be tortured, it doesn't matter if you're not doing the one torturing, it's the equivalent of doing it. So when they send them to these countries, and they made them arrangements to send these migrants who their original country won't take them, and send them to these places that have rampant human rights violation, it's as if you knew. And then also, as I said previously in other videos, when I did a video going through the agreement that he had with these third-party countries, a lot of the third-party countries, like Ghana, for example, when they take the migrants that America sends them, they end up forwarding those migrants to their original country. And when those migrants were in the United States couldn't send them to the original country because they had already shown and proven evidence that they were persecuted. So they're in the middle of an asylum application. So some initial immigration judge looked at their evidence and said, yeah, you can't go back to Liberia. But they want to send them to Liberia, but they don't want to. So what they do, they negotiate with Ghana to dump them in Liberia. They negotiate with Ghana to send them to Togo. So if you are sending them back to Togo or to Ghana through a third-party intermediary, it's the equivalent of you doing that as well. So they violate the United Nations Convention of Torture, not just by sending in their emoluments clause and their filing clause, not just because they facilitated the ability of people to be sent to their home nation where they could expect to be tortured, but also because of what they're doing in the concentration camps and the detention centers, putting on the lights all the time. That's a violation of the United Nations Convention Against Torture. Depriving people of food, depriving people of their medical care, leaving them in cramped quarters. All of that is UN torture. They're torturing people, hoping that they either sign a paper to self-deport. And then we've seen cases where they deport them anyway. So, get back to the video.
I want to pick up on my colleague's questioning because I actually know from years of conversations with you your heart about human rights in countries like Venezuela, Mr. Secretary. And you issued a travel warning, a level 4 travel advisory from your department's website that says right now in Venezuela there's a high risk of wrongful detention, torture, terrorism, kidnapping, arbitrary enforcement of laws, crime, and more. And when we hear from the president that he is in charge, that you all are running this government to that extent, I have a lot of concerns when it comes to the rampant human rights violations that are persisting. Cabello is Maduro's key hardline enforcer. He's continued to intimidate and suppress Venezuelan voices. He remains in control of Venezuela's security services, the colectivos. We're seeing extraordinary examples that the constant oppression of the people is continuing as these folks are remaining in control of the country. So I just want to know what is the plan to address in a much more aggressive manner these severe human rights violations and to try to stop these armed militias. Because if we are doing things to stabilize their government, if we're turning over resources and money to the very groups that are creating these horrors, that seems to me against America's values, and it seems to me something that is should be unacceptable to Congress on both sides.
Yeah, well, absolutely. The Venezuela I described that we want to see emerge from this is one in which none of that is happening. If you think about travel advisories are us imagining worst case scenarios. We have a duty to warn American citizens when they travel to a place that does have a history of Americans being arrested, of Americans being taken. And they may be taken by a deliberate action of a government or entity related to the regime. They may be taken by criminal gangs that control parts of that society. For example, you have these colectivos, as they're called, which basically are these armed motorcycle gangs that are allowed to act with impunity in return for their support for the Maduro regime in the past. You have the ELN and the FARC and other drug trafficking organizations, including Tren de Aragua, that are involved.
Again.
So these are real risks that we have a duty to warn Americans, because here's what we didn't want to see, and I don't mean to interrupt you. we have this announcement that Maduro's been taken. All of a sudden, people conclude, oh, he's gone, let's flood over there, let's all go over there, and we could expose people to danger.
But this is the hypocrisy that I see. At the same time that you're issuing these human rights cautions about what's going on there for Americans, you have a president that's lifting temporary protected status for Venezuelans. Many of them are individuals that have lived in our country for years, if not decades. When I hear from the Venezuelan community, I hear an outrage that at the very same time that you are affirming here that these armed militias are running around suppressing voices, we have an administration that has said very clearly that they're not only going to be lifting temporary protected status for Venezuelans living in the U.S., but instead of protecting longtime American residents, they are, quote, the administration is putting people back on deportation flights and sending them into that madness. Does that make sense to you?
Well, first of all, the travel advisories for American citizens traveling there and the threats posed to Americans. What you're describing
why lift temporary protected status?
Well, the problem with temporary protective status was it was granted to so many people in such a vast numbers so quickly without proper vetting by the previous administration that there's a real concern that there were gang members that had received TPS simply because of the nation they came from and the time in which they came. It became so big and so massive. The overwhelming majority of Venezuelans are not members of Trained at Agua, but there were Trained at Agua and other criminal elements embedded in the TPS system. And the numbers were so large that the administration felt it had to cancel the program in order to appropriately vet it through on the individual cases.
Excuse me.
Post-production editing again, Marco Rubio just said that the reason why they canceled the TPS program as to the Venezuelans because they felt that the Biden administration let in so many people and did not properly vet everyone, and so they just canceled it. Now, you didn't know that that's not the law. That's not allowed. The law that says when you cancel TPS requires only a couple of things. They say that you review the country. The standard is whether or not what's going on in the country is sufficiently subsided. So if it was a natural disaster, if some sort of gang outbreak or political unrest, that has subsided. Once that has subsided, that's the basis when you return people home. You don't return people home because you felt like they weren't properly vetted. The solution, if you feel like people are properly vetted, is you re-vet people as they're here. You don't return them. You just revet it. So you're punishing hundreds of thousands. And according to Ed Chen, who was the judge who reviewed the initial challenge to the TPS revocation, he said the evidence shows that Venezuelan TPS holders have a higher incidences of college attainment and significantly less criminality compared to U.S. citizens. So you're punishing people who are not criminals or doing nothing wrong and actually contributing towards the $3.1 billion annually that TPS and other migrants contribute to the United States economy, federal income and state taxes, $3.1 billion state and local taxes, $14.9 billion and $1.5 billion in business taxes. You're punishing them because you fear possibility of some Tren La Huelga like that. That doesn't even make sense. And then in doing that, you're violating the law because the law says you look at the country. You don't look at whether or not you felt like they weren't properly vetted when you came in. That's not the standard. That's not a thing. So there he is. He made another admission. Like that's like 3 admissions in this one video.
Mr. Secretary, this might not surprise you. I don't trust this administration and the way they use terms like terrorist. I've seen them calling American citizens domestic terrorists who are people trying to peacefully protest. The problem we have right now is the administration continues to make policies that seem to contradict their words, and yet we don't have a process in place for Congress to do its job because people are not calling folks in for these hearings and not providing the kind of oversight that we need. It is very frustrating to me that we still have a repressive regime in power in Venezuela suppressing human rights, yet we are cooperating with them. We are funding them, and we're not calling out the ridiculousness of the violence that's going on there. At the same time, we're taking people who have lived in our country for years and years and years and sending them back into that hell where they can be targeted, where they can be abducted, where they can be held for hostage because they know they have American family members that are still here. This is a situation ripe for where we are being complicit in continuing human rights violations, and that needs to stop. And I think
just on 2 points, we're not cooperating with them to continue doing what they're doing now. We're cooperating with them to transition away from what's happening now. And as I said, we're not even 4 weeks into this thing. And if it continues to look like this in 6 months, 9 months, a year from now, if progress isn't being made, we'll have very different feelings about it. But what we're cooperating on is not the continuation of what's happening. It's a movement away away from all this and transitioning ultimately to something that looks nothing like this. That's the goal. But it's been less than 4 weeks. I mean, we think we've made substantial progress in a very short period of time, but I acknowledge we want to make a lot more progress. This is not the end state that we want.
So how can we use those two admissions against the Trump administration, against Marco Rubio? Now, as for the Alien Enemies Act, if you don't already know, there's ongoing cases. One of the most obvious case is the 200 and something men that were sent to El Salvador. Since then, if you know, the administration swapped them for American journalists as some sort of diplomatic trade. Some of the men were living there. Some of them sadly had disappeared, lost touch with their lawyers. I just pray to God they're okay, because remember, they were here on temporary protective status, and some of them seeking asylum because they were outspoken against the Maduro regime. And the Maduro regime technically is still there because his vice president is still the president. And so even though he's gone, and so that's really bad. So I hope I forget the folks who haven't been heard from are okay. But the Judge Jim Boasberg, who was the judge who, like we mentioned before, they tried to get him disciplined, and that failed. That was an utter failure. They lost that case. That was stupid. That just happened this week because he was doing his job. And he used to be the head of the FISA court, which is Federal Intelligence Surveillance Court. He was like the head of that. So he knows about a thing or two. Judge Boasberg is in charge of the certified class of men that were sent to CCOT. Some of them were gang members. So the ones that were gang members, I don't know what happened to them. They got, when they got sent, what happened to them afterwards. And some of them were head criminals. So, but the ones that were not, the class says the administration has to find a way for them to either come here or have a hearing. They try to say, we don't have to come bring them. We're not going to bring them here. We don't have rights to bring them here. And we shouldn't. Now, I think Marco Rubio's admission there, helps the case that you cause some people to leave this place based on a pretextual lie. I'm hoping the lawyers saw that or noticed that or see this video share widely. And since you said it came off from pretextual lie, then you cause something unnecessarily, you remove people unnecessarily, and now because of your negligence, you feel like you're not obligated because what? Because, and the other thing too, why that's a bogus argument is because they've already done it before. This precedent, they've brought people back. So they can't say, and they've also held hearings when Judge Tanya Chutkin Judge Trevor McFadden was reviewing a case regarding foreign deportation to third parties, and the Trump administration tried to send a bunch of folks who had served their time in the United States, served their time finished, but they still committed a crime while they were not here in lawful status. So because of that, they tried to remove them. The country of origins didn't want them, so you have to send them somewhere. So Donald Trump brokered some deals with a bunch of third-party countries, and it's supposed to be a safe, you're supposed to broker a deal with safe countries, but he didn't care about these people, so he brokered it whatever. A lot of the countries that he brokered deals with, our taxpayers are paying for, by the way, and and they're sending them money from coffers that were not intended for it to be used for that, right? First of all. So they brokered these deals with these third parties or parties that are known for torture, places that are known for human rights violations. Not that we're not known for human rights violations. And they were going to send them to South Sudan. And Judge Trevor McFadden it told them, no, why don't you just hold hearings? So they found a container and they sent them to Djibouti, which the United States has a air base in Djibouti. And they had trials. They had lawyers there. They had trials. They had hearings, without trials, but hearings there. So it's been done. There's precedent for it. So I think Judge Jim Boasberg knows there's precedent for it. So there's precedent for you to do that. You either find a way, like how you've done before, to have hearings in Venezuela so these people can present their evidence, or you bring them here to have a hearing. And what's going to happen, the reason why they're reluctant, is they're going to find out that a lot of the men, they had no business being rounded up, that they had active TPS status, they had active refugee status, asylum claims, and they weren't a member of the TDA gangs, and there's no there's no reason for Donald Trump's reason for determining them was faulty. And so a lot of those men are going to be determined they're going to have to release them. They're going to have to put them back in line. Maybe part of the recovery may even be to accelerate their decisions to be here. You never know. So That's what the benefit of that confession. And then also as for the TPS status case for the Cory Booker confession, saying that, that is an issue that, we here saying this place is really bad. And part of the determination before revoking temporary protective status is doing a country assessment to assess that the reason why the report here has gone down. And we know that it's not an issue. It's even worse. And we see that. And here, Marco Rubio is out here doing a 2-hour hearing saying how bad Venezuela is, totally undermining Kristi Noem's saying it's okay for the TPS status holders to be returned. Marco Rubio says, no, it's not a good place. Marco Rubio agreed with Cory Booker when Cory Booker said, you realize the dangers if you send these people back, some of them who actually are against the Maduro regime, which technically is still in play, that you're setting them up to be kidnapped and have bad things happen to them because everyone, when they go home, know that they have American ties. So do you really want to set these women, men, and children in that situation? And Marco Rubio was kind of like, nah. So that's something that hopefully the lawyers that are representing the Venezuelans who are temporary protective status holders took notice that, and they're going to take it back to the judges that are reviewing. And when right now, it's been blocked as of to Venezuelans, but it may make its way back up to the Supreme Court. Who knows? Wherever it goes along the way, I hope they're able to use Marco Rubio's acknowledgments, Marco Rubio's confessions, Marco Rubio's admissions from that hearing in their case. So, yeah.